Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show that covers all things marketing. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast gives you the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. Whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand, you've come to the right place. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and on tonight's episode, we are talking about 50 Shades of Grey marketing. You know what I'm talking about. It was the book and movie series that took the world by storm. People were obsessed. I can't say if I was someone who was in the camp of being negatively obsessed or positively obsessed, but it seemed like everywhere you go, every conversation you had, it had to do with 50 Shades of Grey. So on today's episode, we are going to talk about 10 different marketing strategies they used to promote the franchise and how you can use those similar marketing strategies to promote your own product. Now, you probably aren't the writer of a book series that is anything like 50 Shades of Grey. You may not even be a writer unless you're a copywriter for a marketing firm. But I can promise you that even if you sell coffee, even if you sell decorative flamingos, there is definitely a lesson in today's podcast episode for you. So get your pen and paper out because we're diving into it right now. Before we get started, let's talk about what is new in the marketing world. Now, the reason I want to talk about what is going on in the world outside of the marketing podcast, it's really simple. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. It is hard. It's hard to deal with. It's hard to mentally and emotionally deal with everything that is probably happening to you and your small business or to your family or to your company. So I think it's really important right now for us to focus on what those bigger companies are doing, for us to be aware of how they are handling it so that we can take notes, so that we can take a little bit of solidarity in the knowledge that, hey, even Disneyland is struggling right now. Nobody knows how to handle this, but the big guys, those big companies, they have the resources, the time, and the money to be able to handle it. So if we can take lessons from them and apply it to our own marketing, then I think we absolutely should every chance we get. So I really like just taking the first segment of the podcast to talk about what those big companies are doing and how you can learn from them. So our first story of today is that Walmart is going to be giving their hourly employees another round of cash bonuses amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Walmart said it will give its U.S. hourly employees another round of cash bonuses in recognition of their contributions to communities across the country during the coronavirus pandemic. The bonus will be $300 for full-time hourly associates and $150 for part-time hourly and temporary associates, adding up to more than $390 million. The company said that this will include employees in stores, clubs, supply chain, and offices and drivers, as well as assistant managers in stores and clubs. I really liked this story, and I don't think it'll surprise anybody why I liked it so much. Like I said, it's a hard time right now. It is a hard time for everyone, including Walmart. But Walmart was one of those essential workers and essential businesses that needed to stay open. They didn't have a choice. They didn't get to work from home. So because of that, they really do need to show how much they appreciate their employees, how much they plan to take care of their employees in a situation like this, because it can be very hard to still work during all of this. It is very hard to still be working during all of this. And I think this is just Walmart recognizing how hard their employees work and how important they are to their business, and this is just them saying thank you. And to anyone who's listening to this podcast, if you work for Walmart or if you work for any company that stayed open during all of this, I just want to say thank you as well, because it's a tough time, and above all else, it's a scary time, and it's really great to see us rely on each other, because without each other, what do we have? So just a really great story coming straight from Walmart that just, it put a smile on my face, and I hope it put a smile on your face as well. Our second news story is that Disney Springs will be reopening, but there will be rules for guests and also park workers. So, more Disney Springs businesses will reopen on May 27th, including the giant World of Disney store and other company-owned establishments. The company also released health and safety measures that will be used during the initial phase of the Disney Springs reopening. For instance, during this reopening, employees and visitors will be required to wear face coverings. Guests must wear them over their nose and mouth at all times, except for when sitting at a dining table, according to a post put on the official Disney Parks blog. Folks arriving at Disney Springs will be required to undergo temperature screenings. Anyone displaying a temperature of 104 degrees or higher will be sent to a second location for another screening. If they measure 104 degrees or higher again, they will not be allowed into the complex, and neither will those in their party, said the blog. This is a really great story because I think it shows us that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. And before we really get to the end of the tunnel, we're going to have to deal with some interesting new norms. But honestly, these health and safety measures were put in place to protect the employees at the Disney parks as well. They have been put in place to protect you, the guest. And I think that is really important. It's really great. And it just shows the level of commitment that Disney really has to ensure that everyone is having a safe, a healthy, and a happy time while visiting their parks. Disney has definitely been one of those companies that you didn't think would be impacted by something like this, but they were hugely impacted by this. Of course they were. Everyone was. And this is just another way in which they were impacted. They can't just open it up and be business as usual. I guarantee that there will also be limits on how many people can be in the park at once and how many people can be in specific dining areas at once. So we're looking at a new normal here, guys, and I don't think it will last forever, but we do need to be prepared for it to be a very different Disneyland and for it to be a very different world that we are going into. So with all that said, though, it is really great to see the Disney parks opening back up, and I, for one, am very excited to see how the next couple of months and how the next year plays into the effect of what will the Disney parks look like, when will these health and safety measures be lifted, or are they around for the long haul? Let me know what you think about this in the review down below, or reach out through social media, because I would really, really love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Our third story is that Starbucks is asking their landlords for a break on rent. According to the Seattle Times, the coffee giant is pressing landlords to offer rent relief for its stores, citing the coronavirus impact on sales. Chief Operating Officer Roz Brewer wrote in a letter in May to their landlords saying, effective June 1st and for at least a period of 12 consecutive months, Starbucks will require concessions to support modified operations and adjustments to lease terms and base rent structures. There has been no decision made yet if they will actually get a break on their rent, or if this is simply an ask that we do not know if it'll be a yes or a no. Guys, again, this is a hard time for everyone, including Starbucks, and this was reported on by the Seattle Times. That's where I got this information, because Seattle and Washington were hit so hard by this, and I know everywhere else was too, but it really did impact Seattle and Washington, and that's where Starbucks is mainly based. Like, every corner there is a new Starbucks, and I can speak from experience. Rent here is not cheap. It's pretty expensive. So I think it is completely reasonable for Starbucks to be like, hey, we need a break from our rent too. The only thing I would ask is if my landlords could also give me a break for 12 months. Could we talk about that? let me know. You listen to the podcast. More importantly, though, I do just think this story really does show the human element behind Starbucks. They are a company. They are a company just like you and your business. Yes, they are a multi-billion-dollar industry, but they're a company. They were affected by this. They are struggling with this, and I think everyone is right now. So it's really important to remember to support each other always, and just know that we're going to get through this, but we are going to get through this together with a little bit of hard work and support. Okay, everyone, we are going to go ahead and take a break from the podcast, but when we come back, we have our top 5 strategies for how you can gain some of that same marketing magic that came with the 50 Shades of Grey series. So stay tuned for that, because you are listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco, ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast covers everything tech. The hottest mobile phones, tablets, games. We review it, rate it, test it. Whether you're Microsoft or Apple, Android or iPhone, we'll give it to you again. Black and white. The Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and on tonight's episode of the podcast, we are talking about 50 Shades of Grey. I know, I can't believe that we are doing an entire podcast episode on this either. Can you tell that I'm in quarantine? Can you tell that I've been very bored lately? Because, guys, I hate to admit it, I watched the 50 Shades of Grey movies the other night. Honestly, I was never really a part of the hype when they came out. I felt like there was always two very strong camps, people who loved them and people who hated them. And I was one of the very, very few people who passively just did not notice. But let me tell you, I was still very aware of their presence. Like, I may not have cared enough to really hate them or cared enough to really like them, but I was very aware that they were a big deal. I was very aware that the movies were coming out and when the books were coming out because of the marketing that went behind these movies. It was insane, and it was something as marketers that we really do need to pay attention to, because I'll be honest, guys, I read 4 pages of one of the 50 Shades of Grey books, and it wasn't good. It just wasn't my cup of tea. Perhaps it is yours, and if it is, good for you. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Maybe we can chat sometime. But it just wasn't my cup of tea, and that's okay. But what I find so interesting is a book that I can't wrap my head around as being very good had so much of an intensely passionate fan base, is what I'll say. People really, really cared about this film and really, really cared about this book. It also got a lot of negative attention too, but guess what? That negative attention, it sold more books. It sold more tickets to the theater. People bought the DVD just to make fun of it. People still bought it even if they hated it. And as marketers, if we can learn to make even our competitors, to make the people who don't like us still buy our product, we're still getting paid. We're still selling product. We're still getting notoriety. So we are still doing our job. So I think the 50 Shades of Grey franchise definitely deserves to be studied on this podcast episode. Please let me know your thoughts of us doing deep dive studies like this into pop culture items. We did a podcast episode on the Twilight series. We did one on the Harry Potter series. We've done them on like Netflix and Disney and Frozen. And I think it's just very interesting to take a look at franchises and companies like that just to see what they did and see if we can take some of those ideas and some of those strategies and put them to use in our own marketing. I want to be so clear though, and I feel like I actually don't stress this enough. I'm not trying to create a rule book here. I am not saying do this and you will be successful. A plus B equals C. No, that's not how it works in marketing. In marketing, you might have to try A minus B equals C, or you might have to try A divided by C and then times it by B. There are so many different routes in marketing and so many different companies and products and brands that I can't just give you a rule book. So take these strategies, try them out if they interest you, and then let me know if they work. You can get in touch with me and tell me if they didn't work or if they did amazing things for your company. I want to hear that too. I don't want to just hear the negative stuff, but I'm saying if there is negative stuff, don't be afraid to tell me that. Guys, as always, please write in the review down below. Reach out through social media. I want to hear from you. I know you want to reach out and tell me stuff, because if you're listening to this podcast, if you're trying this stuff out, why wouldn't you want to share that with someone who is very aware of what happens in this podcast? Guys, I still have dreams of old podcast episodes. Like, when you have to edit your episodes, they just become ingrained in your mind. So please feel free to reach out anytime, and let's talk about marketing. So let's talk about our first 50 Shades of Grey marketing strategy. So number 1, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I don't know how many people actually know this, but 50 Shades of Grey started out as Twilight fan fiction. And Twilight is a story of a different story of Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo and Juliet is something else. There is no original unrequited love story. They're all the same. They're just different character names, but they all sell. They all just do a very good job at taking that original story and that original idea and repurposing it for their own use. So remember, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you do need to make it specific to you and specific to your brand. But it's important to remember that sometimes a classic works, and sometimes, as long as your quality of your product is good, it will sell. So don't worry about it being the most original idea. If it's a good product, it will sell. Number 2, choose the most effective sales channel. So for the 50 Shades of Grey book, do you think their demographic was a bunch of women who really, really wanted to go to like a hard part of town to look through stacks and stacks of books to find the one copy of 50 Shades of Grey that was available in their neighborhood? No, of course not. They had to make 50 Shades of Grey available everywhere. I was just snapping to try to make the point if you're wondering what that sound is. Guys, I'll be honest. Sometimes I forget this is a podcast and that you're not here watching me. Sorry if you hear noises around the microphone. That's me snapping. I want your attention. Anyways, they had to find the most effective sales channel for their demographic. So they took a look at who their demographic was, and they noticed, hey, they really like convenience. Maybe we should sell this book at Target, at Walmart, at Costco, anywhere books are sold. That way our target demographic knows where to get the book. They know where to get it, and it's easy for them to get it. So if you sell coffee and you only sell your coffee beans at one specific farmer's market, are you using the most effective sales channel to reach your demographic? And that is true for anything you sell, but that is the question you need to ask yourself. Number 3, play into your target demographic. So when the author wrote the first 50 Shades of Grey, I'm sure she had an idea of who her demographic would be, but it wasn't for sure. Like, so many things could have changed. A whole bunch of young teenage boys really could have fallen in love with those books, and then things would have been completely different. Because as soon as she did learn who her target demographic was, she played into their needs. She played into their niche. And it was something that you noticed, not so much in the first book, because again, she didn't know who her target demographic was going to be. She had an idea, but she didn't have permanent proof. She didn't have the data to back up the idea yet. But she did have an idea. But by the time the second book came out, she had the data. She had the proof of who her demographic was. So she started playing into their needs, their wants. What would they like to happen to the characters? What storylines would make them happy? What storylines would upset them? She really wanted to play into what they were looking for so that her book could deliver that to them. Number 4, keep things simple. By the third book, 2 movies had been made, and this franchise was huge. If that author wanted to, she could have thrown a whole wrench into the pipeworks and made him a vampire, or made Anastasia Steele decide that she was going to give up everything and go to law school. Guys, again, I did not read the books. I do not know what actually happens. Maybe that does happen, although I'm pretty sure they get married and have a baby. I only saw the first movie. I apologize. But she really could have just messed everything up because she didn't keep things simple. Just because you're getting more successful, just because you're gaining notoriety, just because you have developed a significant fan base and you have a strong platform, does not mean it is time to complicate things. People like your product for your product. So remember that and keep it at the root of all the things you are creating. Number 5, understand your demographic. So not only did she play into her target demographic and understand where they were getting their information from and where they were buying their products, she also really took time to understand who they were as people. So one, when she started writing, she obviously had an understanding that she herself was her target demographic, that she wanted to read this book. That's why she was writing it. And so because of that, she was then able to write it so that other women who are in a similar demographic as her would also want to read it. But if you are not in the same demographic as your audience, then you need to take time to understand who they are and understand who they are outside of your product. What other products do they use? If they drink your coffee, what kind of tea do they drink? Even if you don't sell tea, it's important to know that. What kind of shows do they watch? What kind of car do they drive? What are their jobs? What are their likes and their dislikes? The more you understand your audience, the easier it will be to sell to them. Okay, everyone, we are going to go ahead and take another break from the podcast, but when we come back, we have 5 more strategies for you to test out from the 50 Shades of Grey franchise. So stay tuned for that because you're listening to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll be right back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and on today's episode, we have been talking about 50 Shades of Grey and their marketing strategies. So just to recap you, 50 Shades of Grey, if you've been living under a rock for the past decade, was a 3-book and then a 3-movie franchise that totally took over the media world. It was on every poster. It was in every TV show. Beyonce wrote the soundtrack for it. It was pretty much impossible to get away from the world that was created by the 50 Shades of Grey franchise. And because of that, in a marketing podcast, I think it would be weird for us not to talk about it, because even if you're trying not to sell your sex fantasy romance book, there are still some lessons you can take from the strategies we are talking about today about how you can sell your product, even if it's coffee or soap or bed sheets or really cool leather jackets. It does not matter. You can definitely learn something from these marketing strategies. So let's just quickly review the 5 we already did before the break, and then we'll jump into our final 5. Number 1, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. 50 Shades of Grey is a remake of Twilight, which is a remake of Romeo and Juliet, and so on and so on. There are no real original ideas when it comes to unrequited love, just like there are no original ideas when you're making coffee or bed sheets or leather chairs. It doesn't matter if you're not reinventing the wheel. You don't need to be the best inventor in the world to still have a good quality product. Number 2, choose the most effective sales channel. Can your customers get your product easily and conveniently without having to go out of their own way to get it? Number 3, play into your target demographic. Once you know who your target demographic is, play into their needs, play into what they want, what they like, and what they don't want, and tailor your product to fit their needs. Number 4, keep things simple. Just because you're gaining notoriety, just because you're seeing a little bit of success, does not mean it is time to suddenly start selling tea. No, you're a coffee business. You sell coffee. So you are going to focus your strengths on what you know best and keep things simple. Number 5, understand your demographic. Once you know who your demographic is, once you have the data to support it and to back it up, then understand them a little bit more. What do they like to do in their free time? What kind of outfits do they wear? Who are they married to? Where do they live? That seems like it's getting a little personal, but trust me, the more you know your demographic, the easier it will be to sell to them. All right, guys, so now that you have our top 5, let's get into the rest of the list. Number 6, spread the word. Like I said before, I was in high school when 50 Shades of Grey first came out, and it was everywhere. I was living in a small town in Canada, and it was on every bus bench, it was in the malls, it was on every TV commercial. It was impossible to escape. And that's because their marketing team really understood that spreading the word via social media, guerrilla marketing, if you can even call it guerrilla marketing when it's on a freaking billboard, just everywhere you looked, you saw 50 Shades of Grey. And their marketing team understood the importance of that because the competition for romance novels was huge. There are so many, there to this day are so many that are so similar, if not better than 50 Shades of Grey, but their marketing team understood that if they could just get more copies of 50 Shades of Grey out there, if they could get people to recognize that brand and that look and the cover, that they would sell more copies. Number 7, be ready to build on your initial offering. So 50 Shades of Grey very easily could have been one book, done, never see it again, no movie, no soundtrack by Beyonce, no fandoms. It could have been a one-hit wonder. But it wasn't, and a part of the reason it wasn't is because she wrote that second book, and then she wrote the third book, and then they made the movies, or they made the movies while they were making the books. They constantly expanded their brand. Keeping in mind, they always did keep it simple. It is always still the same story being told. They did not overcomplicate it by any means. So if you are ready to expand your business, if you are currently making one type of coffee bean and it is going very, very well for you, then perhaps it is time to start thinking about maybe I should sell 2 different kinds, or maybe I should sell mugs or t-shirts or open a second shop. Be ready to expand your idea and expand your business. Number 8, keep an eye on popular culture. So like I already said, 50 Shades of Grey was actually Twilight fan fiction, as crazy as that sounds. But what does that tell you if you have read 50 Shades of Grey and you have seen the movies and you are thinking, hold up, Mackenzie, that has nothing to do with Twilight. How could it have ever been based on it? Because by the time that book was coming out, by the time she was writing it with publishers, Twilight was old news. Nobody cared anymore. So she had to take all that Twilight stuff out. So it's important to keep an eye on pop culture, not just so that you can add trends in, but also so that you can be aware of trends you might have in your product that are no longer trendy, to be specific. So you really need to keep an eye on pop culture so that you can always stay relevant. You can take things out of your business that are no longer relevant to your company, to your brand, or to the world around you. Number 9, expand your strategy. Just because one thing is working very, very well does not mean something else won't work just as well. Like I said, the book series was a smash. It was a huge hit. But it didn't mean that the movies weren't going to be. If anything, the movies were widely more popular than the books. More people have seen the movie than they have read the book. I guarantee you that without having looked at any numbers for this. But it's because they expanded their strategy. They saw that it could be more than just one book. They saw that it could be an entire series. Then they saw it could be an entire franchise. And I guarantee we will see some sort of spin-off or reboot or something like that very, very soon. I promise you that. So it's just knowing when to expand your strategy and how to keep things simple so that you can continue to play into your demographic. As long as your demographic will buy it, as long as your demographic supports your expansion, then you're okay to expand. Just don't expand when you're not ready. Don't make that move if it's not right for your company or your brand. Number 10, guys, this one's really important, and it's something that 50 Shades of Grey didn't teach me, but I think it could teach you if you read 50 Shades of Grey. You need to learn how to learn from your mistakes, and that is such an important part of marketing. Sometimes you'll fail, sometimes things will be hard, and sometimes it won't make sense. But that does not give you license to just give up. If you read that first 50 Shades of Grey book, it is riddled with spelling mistakes. It's awful. But also, if you go back and listen to the first episode of this podcast, it's awful. I'm not good at hosting yet. I'm nervous and awkward, and my microphone's not very good. But look at me now. I'm sitting in my living room talking about 50 Shades of Grey on a mic that I got for my birthday present. Thanks, Mom and Dad. But the point is you learn how to do things better from failing. You need to fall before you can fly, just like a baby bird. So, although the first book of the 50 Shades of Grey series may have had spelling mistakes, maybe wasn't the best book out there, by the time she wrote that third one, it was significantly better. And things had changed. Her writing style had changed, but it was better. She improved herself in order to sell more of her product. So I encourage you to take a look at your strategy, take a look at your product, take a look at your brand, and try to find the areas in which you know you could fix. And then grow from there. Don't be upset that you failed. Be happy that you get the opportunity to grow. Okay, everyone, that is it for tonight's episode of the GSMC Marketing Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mackenzie Jaquish, and thank you so much for listening. If you want to show us some love, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Also, follow us on social media. We're super active over there and would absolutely love to connect with you. Thank you for listening. I'm Mackenzie Jaquish, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the GSMC Marketing News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to any podcast app, and you'll find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news, you'll find it all on the GSMC Podcast Network. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.